Conor Niland is with us to talk to us about his new book, which is called The Racket, on tour with tennis's golden generation and the other 99%. So the book is out in the wild. You've obviously been working on it for ages, as the acknowledgements and your kids are like, when's the book out? Finally it's here. What's that like?
Yeah, it's mad. I say it feels like it's been about 10 years. It's been a week and a half. And yeah, I started it during COVID, March 2020, give or take. And yeah, a long process. We kind of got it finished at the end of last year, and yeah, now out in the world.
It looks like you were taking notes.
Yeah, I was.
From way back?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't keep a diary.
Right.
A lot of people have asked me that because obviously the detail is so good in it. But I have a good memory, and I often think maybe I was very engaged in what I was looking at, even without consciously. I wasn't certainly thinking I'm going to write a book about this. But I think when you're in that environment and you're almost trying to survive, I think I was hyper aware of everything that was going on around me and was able to make those connections. I think that was what Penguin found really interesting about the proposal I sent them back in, it was June 2020. I sent them what's pretty much the start of the last chapter. Me and my dad leaving the Challenger event in Kyoto in Japan, and they came back to me and said, we really like this, and will you write a little bit more? And after a couple of months, we had sort of 50, 60 pages of an outline, and I kind of went from there. But yeah, there's obviously a lot of detail and a lot of colour.
We should mention Gavin Cooney at this point. When does he join the project?
He joined the project after about 18 months.
Right.
So we did a lot of work together. A lot of the prose is mine. I wrote a lot of it, but Gavin came in and gave it that kind of, we brought it home together, I guess is the best way we could describe it. We didn't want to leave anything on the table. And I think what Brendan Barrington, the editor in Penguin, used to always say is, I could have written this book myself in terms of what I was bringing to the table as a writer, but we felt like we wanted to kind of have it fulfill its maximum potential from a time perspective. And then Gavin was able to interview me, wrote to draw out more themes together and make those connections, and it's obviously worked out really well.
It's really interesting to hear that the last chapter is the start of the book in your head, because for me, when I read the last chapter, I kind of retrospectively realise that the book is about grief in many ways, and that it's about your relationship with your dad, because he's totally omnipotent in the rest of the book.
It's a book about my dad in disguise, pretending it's a tennis book, but it's about my dad. And yeah, obviously he was massively important. Obviously the dedication at the very start of the book gives you a hint to dad, of course. And but yeah, the first thing I wrote was me and my dad leaving this, kind of mournful Challenger event in Kyoto in Japan. Him watching me in front of in front of a nobody. He was the only spectator, and it was my last match on tour. And yeah, it was the Challenger Tour always felt a little bit out of season was the line, and yeah, it was about my dad, but also about my relationship through tennis.
So, in a way, the grueling subtext to everything else is almost secondary, and yet it isn't. Obviously, it becomes a tennis book too, but the grief kind of is stitched through.
Yeah, it is. And look, I suppose a couple of people have said this book is about the drudgery of professional tennis, and it is, and it's about grief, but it has some humour too.
Oh, totally. It's hilarious.
And a lot of lightness. And that was, again, one of the first things when we sat down at the start of this project. We said, rough ride was mentioned, only a game was mentioned, but it needed to have that lightness of touch and that humour to carry it through. And what's been great for me is to hear people are saying, I'm able to read this. I've read this in 1 or 2 days.
Yeah.
We're able to get through it quickly.
Maybe the other side of the grief is it's actually a love story then, you and your dad and your family and the support.
Yeah, and I talk about that there's that scene where there's a teammate of mine who tells me he'd written I love you to his parents in an email, then he deleted it before he sent it because he couldn't bring himself to do it. And then I talk about phoning home, telling them, I've won another match, and that was sort of our version of I love you almost with our, in our family. Tennis was sort of the thread. And then when I retired, again, I mentioned it in the book how me and my dad's conversations were a little bit more stilted for a little while. Well, we figured out what do we talk about now. We're not talking about tennis in my career anymore.
But luckily, you take up golf and he can guide you there.
He had lots to work on. Yeah, and again, a lot of people have asked me sort of what's been the thing that's replaced tennis and what's the thing that's driven you. And I know golf has been mentioned, but it's definitely been this book has been the sort of the project for me, and been an incredible experience.
So let's go back. Your family, you were the second most famous Niland playing tennis as a kid growing up.
Yeah, exactly. Now Gina was the Irish number one, and when I was sort of 8 or 9, she was playing Fed Cup, Billie Jean King Cup, and I think I was 8 when I went to see her play at Junior Wimbledon. So she was always the the kind of the big tennis name in Ireland, really in the early 90s and that. And she was a great role model for me.
What age were you when you could beat her?
Ooh, that's a good question. That is a very good question. I would say 15, 16, I would say I started to, get that growth spurt. Made a bit of a difference. Now, she may have a different opinion, but yeah, I'll put it at that number. But no, she was amazing. And then I had 2 brothers, Ross and Ray. And Ross was a really good, probably top 5 in Ireland in his age group. A good player as well. And we had a court at home. And used to practice with them a lot. And obviously gave me a big leg up, I suppose.
The book has loads of different aspects to it. One of the key decisions is to go to college in the States, and I think it's one of the other kind of earlier key decisions is not to stay in the Bollettieri Academy. And there's definite moments afterwards in your career where you're like, maybe I should have stayed.
It would have been helpful, yeah, exactly. Like we call it the horrifying gamble in the book that am I going to go off and be a quote unquote tennis player here and go to Bollettieri's and
at 15
and that's all I'm going to do. So we were there at the age of 16. And I guess Bollettieri's in Florida was a different animal back then in the late 90s than it is now in terms of connectivity, and when you were going there pre-internet basically and all that. So you were really going there to sink or swim. And I think those environments now are a lot sort of safer, I suppose, that, back in those days there was a school across the road, and maybe you went, maybe you didn't. I don't know if any. Whereas now, they're churning out guys who are now college athletes. It's very much more streamlined. Whereas for us, it felt not like the Wild West, but it was certainly a different animal. And I chose not to. And yes, it's a thread throughout the book is I've sort of hedged my bets here, and maybe I could have gone forward a little bit more, like the Federers, the Nadals, who were leaving school at 15, 16. Whereas I went to college, studied English at Berkeley, and then went on the tour.
Yeah. They won't be able to write their own books, though.
Yeah, and that's one of the things is I was able to give it that perspective. And as somebody said, obviously the degree in English has definitely kind of shone through in the book, which is great to hear. But yeah, I would have made a lot more money if I'd gone full time with the tennis, possibly.
We should talk about the money, because we talk about money all the time on this show when it comes to the golfers and the tennis players. You lost money playing tennis over your career and needed to rely on the kindness of strangers in many instances. Yeah, literal strangers in some cases.
Yes, well, my sponsor, but also probably more of a charity than a sponsor. Talk about that, how that really helped.
The Bollettieri thing came about from an
anonymous benefactor who we never found out who he was. He asked Tennis Ireland to send their top 2 junior prospects. So myself and Stephen Nugent went out there for 2 weeks and never learned his name. Certainly tried to find out who he was. Don't know if he was Irish or American. And at the end of the 2 weeks, then they said, "Listen, we think you guys have a lot of potential. Would you like to stay on?" And we never really had a second conversation and figured out, is that looking like a 50% scholarship or 100% scholarship? But we sort of slunk back to Ireland and sort of did it the old-fashioned way, which is the safer way.
Not that old-fashioned, though, because you actually end up going to an elite school in England and accidentally blowing the interview when you go out and you knock about a bit and you're grand, not taking it too seriously, and then they're like, we'll give you a portion of your scholarship.
That's right, yeah. So I went for my what I thought was just a penalty kick of an interview, and had a casual hit with the main coach there, who actually had a connection back to Bollettieri's, and kind of came off court and said, "Listen, that's it. I'm starting in September." But then the note came through that I was getting a very small scholarship, and we were expecting a whole lot more, and it was based off this casual hit I was practically doing in a pair of jeans. That was interesting. But an incredible opportunity. Went there for 3 years. It was definitely a huge step up from what I was getting, the opportunities I was getting in Limerick. But again, it was sort of a halfway house. And obviously there's a scene where I'm offered wine at a cheese wine night by my French teacher, and it was not exactly tennis like Bollettieri's would have been.
Yeah. It's a very English secondary school, private education, public school. scene that was kind of Roald Dahl-esque in many ways, and you're trying to put together a tennis career at that point too. It feels like the penny doesn't drop with you about being a full-time professional tennis player until maybe even after college, or in one of the summers in college.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose
You're a little bit pregnant the whole way through.
Yeah, I was never quite sure where I stood, and again, talking about going to the elite junior events in Europe at 13, 14, and while I was the number one in Ireland and and all that, was a good player internationally, was kind of getting a little bit taken aback when I went to the top European events. So I was never quite sure, was I in or was I out? And then it took me really to college tennis, seeing I got to the number 3 in the college tennis NCAA rankings, so I knew that probably translates to a sort of a top 200 potentially ranking globally, which would mean Grand Slam qualifying and potentially a couple of showings at Grand Slam main draw. So I needed those step ups and that, I guess, that validation from college tennis that was where I stood. So as you say, I didn't quite make the leap until I was 23 or so.
That's the Irish thing, isn't it? That's the bit where if you were English, you would have got loads of invites the whole way through, but you'd be plugging into a system where somebody had done the exact same thing as you a generation earlier, or 5 years earlier, or 2 years earlier, and you'd be playing against them and coming up with them.
Yeah, and they'll be showing you what to do. And I think what this book shows is the sort of the learning on the job and the slightly chaotic schedule that I had put together, and training at a health club in Dublin when I finished college, and didn't have a proper setup and didn't have somebody to say, listen, this is where you need to base yourself. This is who you're going to be training with, and off you go, which is obviously what you would have had under the LTA system in the UK.
We just had Simon Carr in last week talking about his retirement, and it feels like everything still isn't quite joined up just yet. That we're like, he was also ploughing largely alone for it. Now he said he got access to the facilities from Tennis Ireland, but still we don't have those events, we don't have those invites. And
what I would say is, certainly when Simon was a teenager, he definitely got probably a lot more than what I would have gotten, in terms of he was in the National Academy training, which was a dedicated academy with the coach and trainers. But then at the age of 18, 19, it starts to all fall away. And unless you're, nearly winning junior Grand Slams and an IMG or somebody comes in for you and starts bankrolling you, you're all of a sudden you're looking around going, who's gonna sponsor me? Where am I gonna train? And it's easy for somebody to say, go and live in Spain and Florida and base yourself there. Well, okay, am I renting an apartment there? He was obviously able to be living at home, base himself there. And again, talk about it a little bit in the book, that I was playing so many tournaments because the setup back at home was so bad. So I felt like I was better off out on the road,
because you might
able to get training and all that.
Yeah.
Exactly. And then luckily for my last couple of years, I was able to use DCU, which had a decent setup for kind of kids. And I sort of elbowed my way in and said, I think I could do this. I'm a little bit closer to the Wimbledon than these 8 and 9-year-olds. And had a good couple of years. Then my last sort of 2-3 years in the tour, when I was based out of DCU, was my most successful, because it was a lot more structured.
If you could go back and rewrite the story to maximise your chance of success, what would you do differently?
I would have stayed in Bollettieri's. It's a very simple answer, but I think that would have helped so much. Within that, 1 acre, of those few courts in Bollettieri's, we hit with Peter Korda, who was 2 in the world at the time, the 2 Williams sisters, Andy Roddick, a future world number 1, Maria Sharapova was a couple of courts away, future world number 1. Bollettieri was there. It was sunshine, palm trees, the canteen, the school, the whole thing was there. It was, not to say it was too easy. There could have been issues, I don't know, but from a pure tennis perspective, it just seemed like a no-brainer.
And then for a tennis player who doesn't have the opportunity to go to Bollettieri, either through a lack of an anonymous benefactor or for other reasons, what is the path?
You need to play a lot of junior events. That's been my big takeaway of the last few years, kind of looking at the Tsitsipas's, the Rublevs. You can see now what they did when they were under 14 in terms of tournaments. Where I wouldn't have had that access back in the old days, but obviously with the internet now, I can see, what did Spanos Tsitsipas do in his under 14 years? Do you know how many tournaments he played? 27 junior European events under 14.
he wasn't doing much school, or they had a tutor or something.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, you got to go all in. You go really hard, really early with tennis, and not a lot of people in Ireland are prepared to do that. Probably because there isn't that path, and they haven't seen it done before. Not to turn anyone off here, but yeah, it needs to be this massive commitment that probably will look a little bit crazy from the outside to people.
How soon do you realise that in your career? Is this something that you are completely fully aware of, that you are at a disadvantage compared to some other tennis players out there, and you just have to get on with it? Or is it something that you've got to force yourself to be a little bit ignorant about?
Exactly. I think you learn self-delusion and how beneficial it is in tennis very quickly in an all sport, and maybe self-delusion isn't the right word, but certainly a way of tricking yourself. And I used to always say, well, there's been lots of tennis players who've come through college that have done well. John Isner and Kevin Anderson and these guys were making sort of latter stages of Grand Slams. I wouldn't let myself remember that they were 6'10" and 6'9", and that may have helped their first serve and helped them win a lot of matches. So yeah, I used to say, listen, I'm 3 in college in the States. Loads of guys have gotten top 200 that way, and I was able to kind of work my way through it that way. But yeah, I think you're constantly kind of tricking yourself.
How did that element of your career tally with your dad's approach to your career, where obviously he was a big driving force in creating you as a tennis player, and then there are all these obstacles that he has no control over? He can push you as hard as he can, but he can't break down those barriers.
Yeah, and I think as well, they were learning too. Like, you know, my dad was a Gaelic footballer, my mum had played sort of national standard tennis, and even though, and that's probably the scary thing, is they'd already gotten a daughter to Junior Wimbledon, which is quite a feat in itself, and they still didn't really know what I should be doing once I finished college, because it is a bit of a minefield, and we kind of learned on the job together. But Dad, you know, used to try and travel with me as much as he could. He was still working full time, and yeah, we just sort of, again, it's all laid out and taken from a bird's eye view now, the book, and it all reads very clearly.
Sure.
But when you're in the middle of it all, you're looking left and right going, I just lost a match, my hip hurts, I need to get points for the next tournament, and you're just chasing all the time.
That's unrelenting, and the psychological pressure and the loneliness of that really shines through. You make the point that there's almost nobody from the tour that you're in touch with, and there's nobody at your wedding from the tour. When you're talking about the pathway, would you like your kids to be professional tennis players?
I'd want them to be absolutely outstanding players if they were going to be tennis players, as in I don't want them in that world where they're fighting to survive. So, you know, if you're at the top of the tree, it's a great life, but I wouldn't want them to be bouncing around, you know, 200 to 600 in the world, because the problem with that is you've made all the sacrifices. So it's purgatory, but you've done all the hard work to get to heaven, if you know what I mean. So it's it's a tough one, and so they're playing. I think you can get a lot out of tennis, and it's not. I'm not saying it's, you know, a dangerous place to be or anything, but it's just it can be brutal at the very top when you're trying to get into that very small world of 100 players in the entire world, trying to get to Wimbledon. And like a lot of people talk about, the prize money, would it not help if they gave more money to the guys 200-300 in the world? But the problem is, even if you are on a decent salary, you're still on the outside looking in, because you're not getting into the major tournaments, because ultimately there's only such a number of guys who can be in a main draw.
Do you wish in many ways that your talents were designated to a different sport or to a different world?
You know what? It could have gone a lot worse for me, you know, in terms of I got to play Grand Slams. It was very, very tough, and that's all laid out in the book. I'm not under any illusions that any other professional sports are an easy ride either. And listen, I'm sanguine about it all. I was a tennis player. I got a lot out of it. It was extremely difficult, and obviously writing this book has clawed back some benefits from all the hardship, I suppose. And so no, listen, it would have probably been a lot easier to play a team sport, put it that way.
It does seem particularly acute, the difficulties that pretty much every single tennis player does face. But even the very best of the tennis players, very, very top tier, have this solo aspect to it, which is a huge psychological demon, and also just the physical toll that the sport takes on your body, consistently playing through pain, illness, whatever the case may be.
Yeah, I mean, I'll always remember, I think it was Andy Murray won the Olympics in 2016, I think it was, and I'll never forget a photo I saw of him about 2 days later on a back court practicing in Cincinnati for the Masters. I was like, hang on a sec. Pretty much every other Olympian gets to go home and get an open top bus and all that, and there he was grinding on a back court, getting ready for the hard court swing, which is tough on the hips and tough on the body, and it's hot. And then he's got to go on a run into the US Open. So as I say, for the very top guys too, it's brutal. And obviously Andy's still out there right now with a metal hip. And yeah, physically a really tough sport, and it never stops. But see, go into this in the book in terms of Andy and the entourage he has, and how he's kind of getting through a lot of these tougher moments with somebody in his corner. I'm getting the news about my hip on my own in an office on Eccles Street or whatever, and he's on Harley Street with a team around him, and that's the difference.
Yeah, he comes across really well in the book, and so does his mum, actually.
They were great. Yeah,
very
always
kind
really
in moments of...
Yeah, when I got sick at US Open, his mum texted me and said, listen, can we help? And she sent Andy's doctor over, and he could only do so much. But and then when I obviously retired against Djokovic, she texted me and said, listen, would you like to go into Andy's box and watch? And I respectfully declined because I still wasn't feeling great. But I didn't want to sort of look like I was cheering raucously in the front row. I haven't been sick for a couple of days before. And trained with him a couple of times in London, and he was always really sound and really decent. And yeah, that was again, as you say, a lot of people have said that Andy and Judy come across really well in the book, which is great. It wasn't sort of something intentionally I wrote, but it obviously came through in the book.
Let's talk about Wimbledon and the US Open. It's kind of another peak where it contrasts nicely with some of the down bits. The qualification for Wimbledon comes at the end of a long series of flying out to Australia, not getting into the draw, getting into the qualifier draw, and then not qualifying. And similarly, you go through this drudgery of showing up and then beating the first round, or win one and beating again. And eventually something clicks in Wimbledon, in the build-up to Wimbledon, to get through the qualifiers. What's different about that year and the other years, looking back?
I suppose I was very close a couple of times and was taking a lot of confidence, and it got to a point where that summer I'd so many guys in the draw that I had beaten that I knew I was as good as. Whereas when I first came in to the Grand Slam qualifyings in 08 and 09, I still felt a little bit of an imposter. And then once I'd won challengers, I just started to feel really comfortable. And you talk about the Wimbledon US Open, and there's sort of a payoff for the reader there. And again, for people listening maybe who aren't as familiar with the book, like, it's not my autobiography. This is a book about professional tennis, and I'm your sort of guide through it. And obviously the arc of my career is sort of the narrative to take you through. But you're obviously getting that personal payoff and that reward. And obviously Wimbledon and the qualification of it is obviously a big payoff. And then we take you through not a shot by shot, but a very detailed look at what's going on inside somebody's head when they're playing at Wimbledon. So the Manarino match in the first round is a very detailed. It takes one entire chapter, and I think people get a really good insight into what's going on in somebody's head when they're playing.
The lingering regrets of not winning that match. Not to spoiler alert, but because he goes on to play Federer in centre court next round.
Yes.
And you know that the draw's made, and obviously Federer's going to win his first round.
Exactly, and he's going to play centre court as well. And but again, as somebody said to me, for what it's worth, the fact that you lost that match has made the book a lot better. And then go to US Open, and I think, the tennis gods are finally giving me my reward. I'm going to play Djokovic on Arthur Ashe Stadium, get my centre court, which I missed out on against Federer, and of course, another spoiler alert, I got food poisoning and lose, and but I think it makes for an unbelievably entertaining that's the sort of 3/4 point of the book, and then it's I think it just works really well.
The definition of what makes Djokovic great, apart from the power of the serves and the speed of the returns, it's the depth on the shots and the consistency of the depth in the shots that is the bit that you find most surprising, which is just interesting to hear. Like, we know this from watching, but you now have experience of it. Yeah,
and I remember, and that's actually, it's not in the book, but I remember I do talk about losing to a guy called Lucas Rosal down in Auckland early 08, I think it was, and remember me and my dad sitting sort of in the bleachers. It's our first sort of time at an ATP qualifying event, and we're looking down, and Dad looks at me and goes, "These guys are hitting the ball unbelievably deep." And I said, "Yeah, they actually are." And they were just hitting the ball. Every single ball was not only past the service line, it was a good bit past. And then these guys were sort of, you're 50 in the world type operators. And then all of a sudden I got on the court against Djokovic, and it's like I'm hitting my serve and I'm still almost coming out of my service motion, have barely lifted my head, and the ball's down my throat. And it was just this constant depth. It's not like everybody can hit the ball pretty close to the baseline, but it was kind of 2 feet from the baseline. He's able to do it 6-7 times in a row, and that's a killer. And yeah,
You'd hit with Andy Murray. Was it similar, or when someone's hitting with you, is that still different from a match?
So again, I talk about this drill that I do with Andy in London, and where it's like the most simple drill in the world, where he takes an empty can of tennis balls and puts them about 2 inches inside the baseline, and I do the same. And he goes, right, first, to hit 3 in the next 5 minutes sort of wins, and he's absolutely denting the can. It's flying all over the place, and I haven't hit one. Even though my depth is decent, it's not going to the baseline. So then Andy Murray's physical trainer, Matt Little, brings out this huge metal bin from the side of the court and puts it down. It's like, "Here, do you want to have a go at trying to hit this, Conor?" So it was such a simple drill, and my drills for depth, I'd always put the can further up. And yes, so he was working on that. That was almost like the basis of it. And it was, again, I played Andy in a couple of practice sets, and again, a similar feeling to against Novak, where you just feel like you've nowhere to turn. They're 6'3", and again, Novak known for being an unbelievable returner. And first point of the match, like, he pops this 130-mile-an-hour ace down the tee, and I'm thinking, oh no, he's got that as well. So yeah, challenging.
And just to go back to the question about, like, what's the tipping point for somebody to be able to make a living out of it? It goes from being completely broke to actually being relatively well off. At what point? Is it top 50?
100 really, yeah. And because you're getting the Grand Slam prize money, and I guess, yeah, okay, there's definitely a step up again when you get top 50, because you're getting into the main draw of the Masters Series, which again is a big prize fund. It has actually improved a little bit. They brought in more money for the qualifying of Grand Slams, but Federer was our sport's first billionaire, 6-7 years ago, and they're obviously getting appearance fees as well, which don't come onto the ledger. You don't hear about that.
Yeah.
That side of the prize money that we don't get. And then also, they get the main court, they get the practice court, they get to book out centre court for 2 hours for their practice, whereas we mightn't even see centre court. Like, I didn't hit on Arthur Ashe, which was a really uncomfortable experience anyway, but then having to deal with this atmosphere that I wouldn't even have had half an hour on is a little bit unfair. I didn't lean into that too much in the book, but I know a lot of ex-pros, a guy called John Millman, an Aussie guy who's been top 100, talks about how that practice schedule really annoys a lot of those guys around 50, 60 in the world, because they can't
break in. It's
they can't. They're even sharing a court. There's 4 in a court in their practices, sometimes in an outside court, and the lads have 2 hours on the stadium.
Yeah.
So was it the worst shape you've ever been in playing a match?
It's funny. I obviously travelled a lot of exotic places and was always very simple with my food, and went with rice and chicken most of the time. And then the 2 times I got food poisoning in my career was in New York, obviously at the US Open, and also in Surrey in England, at a golf club where there was a tennis club as well, where I was playing at Futures. So I obviously was a little bit more relaxed. I definitely wouldn't have played if it was any other event. And I've watched the match back. It doesn't take long to watch it back. It wasn't very long, but I actually did okay, considering I remember how I felt, and was able to play a few good points and have a reasonable bit of time out there. But yeah, it was a very weird experience, just kind of thinking, how has this happened this time of all times?
Do you think it's something you might have enjoyed without that?
I would have enjoyed the 2 days before a lot more. I also would have been able to figure out, because I was playing as good as I've ever played that whole week. I dropped only 1 set in qualifying, felt really, really good. So it was going to be the ultimate test, right? And I was going to take a lot from it in terms of learning what these guys feel like. And also, if I went up a gear, obviously Djokovic no doubt would have gone up a gear as well. So I missed out on that. But again, I see in the second round Djokovic plays a really good Argentinian guy, Carlos Burlock, and Burlock's hitting the ball great. The points are long, they're extended, but Djokovic is, winning 90% of them. And so I feel like even if I was playing really, really high level tennis, Djokovic would have matched it.
He beats Nadal and Federer later in the same tournament.
Yeah, not bad. He was in his prime then, he's been in his prime for a long time, not in his prime anymore, but he won 3 of the 4 slams that year, was number 1 in the world, and was just looked incredible. Talk about it a lot. These guys look, they've been spray painted gold, they just look so healthy, and he was a handful.
Did you feel like you disappointed him in any way by retiring?
It's a great question. Nobody said that to me. I don't think so. I didn't get that sense. I do talk about going to the net and shaking his hand and saying, listen, I've been sick. I'm going to have to retire. And he didn't say anything, which is unusual. Like, we've all retired and had people retire against us, and he always say, oh, sorry to hear that, hope you feel better. And he just didn't speak. And I was kind of waiting for him to, and then we just walked off. And then he did say, in the press conference after, I hope my opponent recovers. Again, we're always given the my opponent moniker as opposed to our names in tennis for some reason when we're not at the very top. But then I did go back at the Australian Open in January and walked into the locker room, and who was tying his shoelaces and looked up at me and said, hey, have you recovered? And I said, yeah, I've recovered after about 2 days, feeling good, thanks. So in fairness to him, he smiled and said, listen, have you recovered? How you feeling? And all that. So that was nice.
The rest of the world stops for Novak when you're not in it. It's just his world, and then the glare and the headlights are like, oh, so you're still sick 4 months later.
Exactly.
Colin wanted to ask, why aren't there more professional Irish tennis players? We have a number of professional golfers. We have loads of courts, just like we have loads of courses. Is it down to the different quality of the respective surfaces? I suspect it's institutional and historic, and
there's lots of that. There's a few lingering institutional issues. I suppose with golf, like, you can go online now and there's probably about 20 competitions at least going on in the country today, even if they are low level. So I think there's just the domestic calendar in golf just seems a lot healthier, whereas in tennis it's still a little bit more focused on the summer. You can play golf in the rain. You can't play tennis in the rain. I think that helps. You can play playing golf in the wind and the rain probably makes you better. It makes you worse as a tennis player. And he says we have lots of courts, but like, we have an Irish Open in golf that's a major event. We've got literally the best some of the best courses in the world. So it's a destination for people, and we have that history and that culture of it. So I also think, I think golf is a little bit more of an American-centric sport. I think tennis is a little bit more international. I do think it's slightly more competitive. I don't want to annoy any golf people listening. I get how competitive golf is. It's one of the world sports, but I do think golf is
decent living being the 200 best.
Yeah, they've also got various tours, right? Yeah. You've got your European tour and your PGA tour and your Sunshine tour and that, where you can make more money.
Yeah. Your relationship with tennis, you say you still love the game now, and you've obviously been Davis Cup captain. Are you involved in tennis?
Yeah, I mean, I'm still Davis Cup non-playing captain, but that's a part-time role. It's a couple of weeks a year, and there's maintenance during the year with the guys, but there isn't the budget for it to be anything more than that. Like my relationship with tennis, it's more that my relationship with my own career is quite complicated. But and obviously the tour was tough on me. But I'm still watching the tennis. I'm still getting excited watching Alcaraz and the French, and I sat down and watched the whole thing, and I still love it. It's still a huge part of my identity, and kids are playing and that. So I'm not. This book isn't a book about tennis being this awful world. It's just a strange world, and it's a world that hasn't really been exposed before. So,
will you need a hip replacement?
I had surgery on both hips when I finished. They weren't replacements.
Well, was it the same?
It was sort of a scope. It was a tidy up of torn cartilage and bits and pieces. Hip's fine. I can go and do it. I can do whatever I want. I can't go and play tennis for 2 hours, a few days in a row. But I don't think I'd want to do that anyway. So no, I'm fine. I hope not.
So there's no guarantee then that it has had that. Pardon me. Sorry, that long-lasting damage to your hip. It actually might have got away.
Yeah, it's not too bad.
Or would it be normal compared
Yeah,
to...
I think so. Like, there's no ongoing issues there, yeah, so no kind of worries on that. But again, I finished at 30, and if I'd kept going another few years, that would be a different story. I do worry about Andy's metal hip. It's not made for that, what he's doing. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out for him. Hopefully he's okay.
The future of the sport in Ireland, what's it looks like there are some clear pathways. Even Simon Carr was saying that maybe in retrospect he could have gone to college so that he would have had that to fall back on, and that's also like a totally legitimate career path for people as well. It'd be great maybe to take all the lessons from your career, from Simon's career, and see if they can begin to build a pathway for our young players.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully this book will help shine a light on what it looks like for a pro player coming out of Ireland. And as I say, what I would love to see is a main tour event in Ireland. I think it would be something that the media could get behind. You could kind of hang this week in the calendar every year, and would give you wild cards for your players. I know they're expensive. It would be probably a lost leader, certainly for a few years, but you'd have to think somebody would be able to get behind a Wimbledon warm-up event, WTA event possibly. I think that would be incredible.
So what would the economics of that be? Some benefactor would need to come in and decide that I'm going to put on, or...
Yeah, no, it would cost, I don't know what the number would be, but you'd be in the millions, I would have thought, in terms of having to put on an event like this. So not easy, but I just think it would make such a difference. And every other country in sort of Western Europe has one or two of those events.
Multiple, yeah.
That would be one thing. And then, as I talk about, going back to the Tsitsipas Rublev schedules at 14, I think just knowing that, having Tennis Ireland potentially wouldn't even have known. What does it look like? What does a 13 or 14-year-old international class player, what does their life look like at 13 or 14?
Yeah. You make
are
the
we
point,
prepared to do it?
It looks a bit crazy, right? And because it's not a decision that a 13-year-old makes, it's a decision that the whole family has to make. And there's a push-pull element of that. Teenager might want to do it desperately, or might not want to do it, but might have the talent to do it, and might need a gentle push.
And what makes it easier is having tournaments in your own country, so that at least if they are playing 20 events, maybe 9 of them are in Ireland.
Yeah.
And again, if you look at a lot of even the smaller countries like your Denmarks or your Belgiums, your Hollands, they have a lot of junior world ranking events in their home country for exactly that reason. So sure, they're having to get on the road 8-9 weeks a year at 13 or 14, still tough, but at least they're able to then supplement it at home. So I think that's the way to go.
So there's a template there. If
and they've actually, Tennis Ireland have brought in a few more events in the last 3 or 4 years for the under 12, under 14. So they are able to get, because what happens is you've got international juniors then coming over to Ireland, and they're obviously training with the best, practicing with the best, playing matches against the best, and they're picking up world ranking points. So I think that's the way to go. Yeah,
okay. The book is called The Racket. It is available in all good bookshops now. You've got a London launch this week?
Yeah, I'm in bookstore in Balham in London next Wednesday, and a few other bits and pieces in London. So hopefully, Wimbledon and all that will be busy the next few weeks.
Yeah, as you said, you can read it in 2 sittings if you want to. It's perfect holiday fodder, particularly as the sun shines and everybody picks up their tennis rackets for Wimbledon. Thanks very much for coming in.
Thanks, Ger. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
On tomorrow's show, we're back with Fintan Drury. We're going to play the other part of our OTB Breakfast BYD Roadshow from last week in Cabra. A brilliant career chat with Clinton Morrison and with David Myler. And this week we're back at it again. OTB Breakfast BYD Roadshow in Limerick with Brian Kerr and Damien Delaney. We'll have loads more on tomorrow's show as well. It's June 18th. Happy birthday to Irish football legend Jason McAteer. Anybody, any idea what Jason McAteer is?
It's 5 in front of it anyway, I'd say.
There is, yeah.
52.
Close.
51.
53. Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang. What age is he?
Ooh. 34?
32.
35.
Oh, come on. One off every
Conor
time.
Niland's good at this. Current Arsenal attacker Gabriel Martinelli.
Ooh, 26.
No.
Oh,
I'd
way
say
off.
I'd say you're one off. I'd say 25.
He's 23 today.
She's young boy.
Yeah.
You should get this one. French tennis cult hero Richard Gasquet.
39. 38.
38.
Would you ever play against him?
Oh, there's a pretty funny No, but I played him in a practice set and had a practice with him. It's late in the book, and it's Colm, I know you just had a baby, so I know you're getting to this when you have a bit of time, but you'll enjoy the scene where, I practiced with him in an ATP event in India, and do we have time for me to go into this quick story? And I've just missed getting into the main draw by right, so I think I'm number one seed in qualifying. But anyway, I turn up a couple of days before, and I go into the referee's office, and there's a sheet down sort of for the practice course the next day, and it has Gasquet plus looking, or Gasquet plus question mark, which is what tennis players do when they haven't got a practice partner set. So it's sort of 11 o'clock the next day. So I see Gasquet plus looking, I'm like, perfect. Scrape out looking, put in Niland, and all good. Turn up the next morning, I'm there a couple of minutes early. I'm sitting on the court, ready to go, and I kind of hear footsteps behind me. I turn around, and Gasquet walks onto the court, turns hard left to the bench on the other side of the umpire's chair, gets his racket out of his bag, and walks straight to the baseline. And I'm like, okay, no, hello. That's, because usually, obviously, you say hi, introduce yourself. And I was like, wow, okay, maybe he's annoyed I've signed in. I'm not a main draw player or something, but again, that wouldn't be quite right. And we end up having like the longest rally of all time to start, because I'm so determined to show him that I'm like a good player, and to the point where after like a while he literally catches the ball and throws it to his coach and hits another one because the ball was getting worn out. So I'm feeling really pleased with myself. And then we play a practice set then at the end to finish, and he beats me 6-love. I'm absolutely raging. And I ring home, and I'm like, Dad, I thought I was playing well, but he was hitting these unbelievable angles and moved me all over the court. And Dad, from back in Ireland, goes, you were obviously standing too far back. You should have cut off the angles and moved forward. So I thought it was a pretty impressive assessment from Dad in terms of where I'd gone wrong in the set.
There are great characters in the book. Your American coach is brilliant. Your time in Berkeley is brilliant as well. One thing that does strike me, though, is that a lot of tennis players are kind of dicks.
Yeah, they don't. I think they kind of have to be, or it's rewarded, and they're in their own little world, big time. And you also get burned a lot as a tennis player. Like, you never know quite when to say hi to somebody and when not to. Do they remember me? I played them a year and a half ago. Are we friends, or do they like me? Do we know each other? And then all the top guys, everyone's saying hello to them because, everyone knows who they are. And they come across as the really friendly guys. So it's almost a little bit of a, you'd find yourself in a hotel in Taiwan, and there's 32 of you there, and you're up at breakfast at the buffet, and you look at a guy beside you in, head to toe in Nike gear. You're both playing in the tournament, and you're not saying hi to each other. It's like, what are we doing? You know what I mean? It's the culture of tennis is, I'm going to wait for the other guy just to make the approach and say hi and be friends, because I think it's just such a competitive world. And it's when you see another group of tennis players on a plane going to the same venue you're going to, your heart kind of sinks. It's like, oh, it's more competition. You know what I mean? So it's just, yeah.
But it doesn't have an impact on the actual match itself, does it?
No.
You feel it does, though.
Well, you're
concerned it might do.
Well, you need to have that kind of veneer of polite. It's like they're like colleagues almost, because you are coming across them. You need to practice with them, like the Gasquet thing. You're coming across them all the time. So it's this slightly unfriendly, but never really going into the boundaries of having a row or having falling outs with other players. Obviously that happens sometimes, but generally doesn't.
Yeah.
So you're kind of walking that line all the time of not being friends and not being enemies.
Because there's one of them who's a young player's name I forget, who is very friendly with you, and then gets better and better and better,
Dimitrov,
and blanks you eventually.
Yeah, Dimitrov, we'd spent a few days training, practicing together at the tournament, had dinner a couple of the nights because he was there on his own, his coach hadn't arrived, and then, a couple of years later, you kind of see him, and he's top 50 in the world, and he doesn't say hi, and you kind of think, it's so hard to get out of that Futures Challenger level. I think once you get there, you don't want to go back. And I was sort of a reminder of that world that he didn't want to be in. He wants to be in as short a time as possible. So he's not going to be inviting me back in. I'm this challenger guy, and he wants to be. He's looking further ahead. Yeah.
There's also great stuff about match fixing, which we didn't get into, and your private messages on Facebook. There's a big theme we've been covering on the show just recently, how easy it is for people to access the tennis players and put them off one way or another. It's kind of crazy.
And send them abusive messages, and obviously have that scene in the book. At the end of a very long year, I open up a message, having lost in Japan, and it was not a congratulatory message on great year, Conor. It was, can't believe you lost, and lots of colourful language. So
Yeah. Because he'd bet on you.
Yeah, and it was a bad bet because I was exhausted. Just won a challenger in Austria, flew to Japan, actually somehow managed to win my first round. It was sort of a commitment. I had to go to the tournament, and then was really tired, lost to a guy a little bit lower ranked, not much lower ranked. And this fella has obviously just looked at the rankings and said, oh, Conor will beat this guy. But obviously hadn't factored in that I just travelled, 12,000 miles a couple of days before.
Yeah.
So not a good bet.
Pretty important information, it turns out. And then the last birthday today, Paul McCartney. What age is Paul McCartney?